Welcome to Chapter 2, Manifest in a Participatory Universe. And in Chapter 2, we're going to review some of the things I covered in Chapter 1 and try to envelop them into a greater framework. And this chapter is called The Universe and the Clockmaker, where we learn how truly special we are, right? If we don't appreciate how special we are, then it's just standard existence. And I don't even know what a standard existence is, but we don't understand how special we are because we've always been that way. So we actually have to reset our frame and reset our understanding to understand why we are special. And we're going to start in biology. And I'm not going to dig into systems and bones and all that kind of stuff because I think everybody has enough of that from high school or elementary school, and understanding that we all digest and we all have brains and circulatory systems and hearts that pump blood. And what I'm interested in are brains. Okay, and really, our brain is amazing. And I'm not even going to get into all the pieces. I'm going to keep it pretty high level so we can get through this, because if you dig into all the different pieces and how they work and the connections and all these trillions of processes that your brain handles, it's a bit much. But if we kind of keep it high level, then we can actually kind of party with the brain. We can see that the brain is a crazy fun place to hang out. The field of neuroscience is giving us this idea of the locations that activate with different signals and for different purposes. So we've discovered this complex web of activation and reactivation and change and growth. And we ourselves are finally growing to understand the complex nature of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to keep learning and changing throughout life. People used to actually think that the brain, once it got to a certain point, never changed anymore. That you could not teach an old dog new tricks. They thought that once you got to a certain point of development, that's where you stayed. But we know the brain is remarkably flexible and also remarkably stubborn. So we're going to start with the neocortex. And the neocortex is the newer brain. Neo meaning new, and cortex referring to the brain. It actually is named the new brain. And it sits on top of and around the limbic brain, which is the older brain. The neocortex is connected directly with sight and sound, and it recognizes and interprets all of this sensory information. Okay, so that's definitely your location, what you're hearing about it, what you're feeling about it, actually emotion, naming the emotions, to be very precise. Because as you stand there, if you stand in any setting, if you start looking around you, what you're feeling, what you're hearing, what you're touching, the wind across your face, all of these things are sensory perceptions that go into the neocortex and start to define the world around you. In fact, without all of that sensory information, the neocortex couldn't really put any picture to anything outside itself. See, it receives information and it takes some time to process that information for recognition, because the neocortex is constantly running these back and forth signals, comparing whatever information is coming in with experiences from the past and things that have happened before so that it can match up and adjust where necessary. It's constantly testing the world outside itself. The neocortex is an amazing supercomputer that contains catalogs of our experiences. The challenge as we grow is that our focus, our bodies, and our world changes around us. And the neocortex kind of takes time to finish baking. I mean, if we're going to give an analogy like a cake, it takes like 6 to 12 years before the neocortex really has gotten to a point of functioning properly, of having enough information to build a 3-layer cake, really. Next is the limbic brain, and this is the basic brain that rests kind of inside of the neocortex, and the limbic brain is the ancient brain, sometimes called the lizard brain, right? It controls survival, like eating and sleeping and reproducing, the drive for these things. It controls the fight or flight response, or freeze or fawn, however you really want to extend that and see the reactions. And it controls the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So a lot of the responses of breathing, digesting, sleeping, when you become hungry, these are things that happen automatically. You don't think about them at all. So it's very basic level programming. Now, the thing about that basic level programming is this is sort of like going into the subconscious realm. You don't exactly know what some of these responses are, what some of these motivations are that drive it. But when the limbic brain receives information, it acts. It acts super fast, much faster than the neocortex, and it jumps a reaction, okay? Now, when we perceive our environment through our senses, those senses then send chemical signals to trigger chemical reactions within the body. Those reactions lead to an intention sometimes, definitely potential, and action. The chemical reactions stop when they stop being triggered. Now, we tend to think of that like we see a stimulus and then we act on it. But our system is actually much faster than that, because we can sense a stimulus and the limbic brain will already be activating the fight or flight response long before the vision and the hearing catches up to identify what that object is that is being triggered for us. And once we identify it, if it's not a trigger, then that's how the chemical reactions stop being triggered. The brain shuts that off. But if it is a trigger, then we go full on even more into the fight or flight response. These basics give us like a body operating system, and it's something that we barely touch on in school. Here, we have instruction books for VCRs and DVD players and receivers and televisions, but nobody gives you the operating manual for your body. And this is part of it, understanding that you have two different brains that work on two different speeds, and they work cooperatively, but that they're all based on outside triggers of some kind moving in toward the perception of it. They tell our body how to interpret the outside world. Through automatic actions and reactions in our body, we start to observe the rules of survival, environment, and time. For example, the amount of neurotransmitter serotonin increases with the sun, and it falls in the evening. As serotonin falls, melatonin rises. If you've ever taken the pills melatonin to help you get to sleep, it's because melatonin should rise in the body as the sun goes down and serotonin falls. These two are connected. As the evening wanes and light creeps over a horizon, serotonin rises again and melatonin falls. These neurotransmitters have an ebb and flow within our body, and our body recognizes this pattern chemically over time. The limbic brain actually starts to predict it and get used to it. It uses these cycles to optimize body maintenance, whether we rise, when we eat, poop, sleep, and occasionally run away. And a lot of this is managed in the limbic brain because we don't actively think it's night, we must do sleep time. It is day, we must do eat and poop time. No, it's just something that our body does automatically as it maintains itself. It's part of that base operating system. And honestly, we learn these behaviors when we are so young, light and nighttime, and observing the world around us, that these connections become deeply buried in our basic beliefs just about the world. And the neat thing is, through the chemical perception of cycles in time, we actually realize advancements like forecasting the seasons for planting, or predicting herd migration patterns for hunting. It also lends an understanding of the cycles in nature so that we can find shelter and protect ourselves. Our brains put together this idea of cycles and thought, and eventually reach the point where we feel like we can predict some of the future based on the past. For early tribal civilizations, it was the job of the elder to teach others when to plant and where to hunt. Someone had to carry the knowledge and pass it forward so it's not lost, because if we had to learn that each ourselves every single time, it would take too long. So elders would teach these things and say, this is the pattern, the sun up, the sun down. It goes for so many times. Look at the moon. Early civilizations were very observant of the atmospheres around them, of the environments around them, and they would carry this knowledge from one person to the next. Later, scrolls, books, libraries, and the internet, they're all ways that we've carried on this tradition. We are encapsulating the knowledge we have come up to from now and trying to pass it forward. In this way, we recognize society and our world as taking place along a timeline, right? Because we see that things have happened in the past, things happen on a cycle, therefore we can see that they move forward in time. By observation and education, we gain an understanding and belief in time. We understand that something that happened before may affect us now, and something that we do now may affect the future. But in general, we are stuck in this cycle of cycles. Our brains recognize patterns very quickly and are super efficient to limit body resources when it's repeating tasks. So when we start to recognize that there's night and day, the limbic brain actually, that subconscious, starts to build in this signal that says, look, during the night, let's not waste resources. Or during the day, let's use our resources to eat and to take care of ourselves during the best time that we can see over the cycles. You know, day and night is a pretty standard cycle, and when it gets relegated to background programming, it affects many of the other systems that we think and do. It's a consecrated belief that time happens. And it's easy to see because it's very observational even in our everyday lives, right? We remember the past, we are in the present, therefore the future is coming and it's not here yet, right? So the cool thing is that perception, that prediction ability, whether it's right or not, time perception is an evolutionary trend to help survival via prediction. Through perception of change and the memory and recognition pattern of it, we actually gain the ability to predict the obvious. It's survival skills 101. How do you plant if you don't already know that this season coming up is going to be the planting season? Maybe it would get too cold. Somebody must have tested these theories, these hypotheses at some point so that they have better survival skills. And predicting these things is significant so that civilizations and tribes can survive year after year after year. Now, is the future really that obvious? Heck no! Because time is something the brain made up. And that's the first shocker here. Time is something the brain made up. Time, whether it's an hour or a second or a nanosecond, time is one of those points. Okay, think of it in that theoretical terms. Time is a point. And if time, think of a timeline, what it is millions and millions of points lined up one right after another. The events occurring in sequence are something our brains have put together to understand the light coming in, the time, the cycles of the sun as it moves around things, but it gives us a false sense that we can predict the future when the future can't actually be predicted. But because our brains have made up this idea of time, we get a little bit of an ego about what we can and can't do. You know, I can predict the future. Sure you can. So part of this is that time is something the brain actually makes up, and it's fairly early in our development to explain the cycles of input. You know, night and day, repeat cycles of week and weekend, and year after year, so that we understand our reality better. We understand the world that we are growing in and the brain is evolving in, and we place it in a context for easy retrieval in the neocortex, in the limbic brain, in all of the different brain systems. As we understand the cycles of life, then we can kind of put these places for easy retrieval. But, you know, that's not everything. So I'm going to jump over to physics really quick so we can kind of understand the next step. And the next step is our perception of reality is based on attraction and light. Now, if you've gone on a date with somebody you really like, love, maybe it's that first date thing, and there's a connection there. There's like an energy. There's partially it's nervous energy, partially it's you're getting along, but there's an attraction, right? Okay, so we'll go back to the cube and we'll try to explain this a little bit. Remember all those waves of subatomic energy passing near that same point in the universe? I'm going to go ahead and say, let's call that the here and now. And we're going to take a closer look, okay? This is the here and now. Simplified, of course. If we overlaid all the possibilities of realities passing through this point, it would look like a solid circle, and that wouldn't do anybody any good. I want us to see the waves, the frequencies, and how they might interplay at this level. So we can kind of see that some go through the center, some don't. It's very much a guessing game of what is going on. Each crosses, but then you see I've cut it off at a point just outside the circle. But they don't stop. Those frequencies keep going on forever in all directions, right? This is energy, this is the universe that we can't see and that we can see. So we'll go ahead and step back and imagine that, okay, all of those crossing in this spot and we have a single frequency, whatever this is. And we can tell that the frequencies that are like this, that are similar to this, will be drawn to it in some way, and similar subatomic frequencies attract and align on these similar wavelengths at a larger scale, right? That's how we get more subatomic particles and atoms and things. Like, they start to group. That's a natural thing. Like attracts like, right? There's a pooling effect of attraction that goes on from the smallest levels in these vibrations and these positive and negative frequencies. You know, things that fit together naturally want to be together. So light. Light's the other one. Light brings life. We cannot survive on this planet without the sun. We cannot recognize anything without the sun. We would not be here without its heat and warmth. It sends energy to Earth through particles called photons, and that's what helps plants grow. But it's not just the sun, because light bulbs give off light. Cells give off light. Matter gives off light. Now, what is that light? You know, different frequencies of it are different frequencies of photon. And photons are light particles that basically careen through space and hit our eyes. Photons are electromagnetic energy of varying wavelengths that include a visible spectrum. And I say include a visible spectrum because it definitely includes an invisible spectrum on both sides of what we can see. And what we can see is what shows us the world around us through our eyes. We are interpreting the molecules, the energies, the vibrations, the frequency of things around us based on photons bouncing off of those things and hitting us, and sort of, it's you know, if you've seen the movie Daredevil, it's sort of like he uses his ears in the same way. Bats and echolocation, it's sort of bouncing things off and back into us so that we understand it. Only for us, it's light. For bats, it's echolocation. For Daredevil, it's sound. Everything we see is because a photon has bounced off of something else and into our senses. Our brain translates that information in a way we understand based on what we learn growing up and what we choose to believe. Photons are a basic unit of nature called an elementary particle, meaning we don't believe they can be broken down any further, which is super interesting. It's the reason they use them for a lot of tests. You know, they have lasers that blast photons at things, and they say, okay, well, we're pretty sure it does this, and therefore electrons should do this, because as an elementary particle, that's like saying that the photon is the tiny vibration, is the tiny frequency, is the tiny thing that's just buzzing in itself and creating its own shape. And the neat thing about photons is, from the moment they flare into being, they're always in motion. They are zipping around at the speed of light, and it seems like they go as like a group and individual things and pieces and parts. What we see as a column of light could actually be interpreted, if we got in there really close and we could actually perceive it, as zillions of particles bunched together and shooting off randomly. So, you know, photons aren't just one thing, it's a bunch of grouped or photons are these grouped things, but light can be seen as like a pool that we're swimming in constantly. We are just drowning in a sea of photons. Otherwise, we would not perceive anything around us. Now, the thing is, because they're vibrating and because they're moving and because of all that stuff, when we zoom out on them, we perceive it as something like this, right? It's an energy particle in the ocean in which we drown. We perceive the world because these glows bounce off of everything and allows us to perceive the thing that they bounced off of. Really, our perception of reality is based in tiny collisions. And these particles collide and bounce off everything. In theory, nothing travels faster than light. In miles per hour, light speed is about 670,616,629 miles per hour. If you could travel at the speed of light, you would go around the Earth 7.5 times in 1 second. From the instant the photon's created, the speed of light is supposedly constant, independent of the observer, meaning when it flashes into being, it already takes off going in a direction that fast. So, it spends the rest of its existence bouncing off other particles and just passing through space. The interesting thing is that they're influenced by gravity. So as light kind of passes near heavier, dense objects with higher gravity, we can see that it bends light. It bends the effect of light. So the other thing is that photons both collide and bounce as well as pass through objects. And as they pass through, they kind of lose different frequencies and change color. That's how we perceive color, actually, is color frequencies of a certain type are absorbed, and whatever is not absorbed into the atoms, the molecules, say it's a table, say it's a wooden table, whatever color is not absorbed by the molecules of that wooden table bounce back into our eyes. The color that we perceive is not actually the color of the objects that we see. We are perceiving the opposite of the colors that they actually are, but that's how we interpret them. Is we are correct and that is the color. It is truth that our eyes perceive the opposite of what those things are actually absorbing and being. Which brings about an interesting idea. Our senses are receivers. We recognize color, distance, location, and other people because we can see. We can hear. We can smell. We are receivers, and in terms of light, the eyes play a very important role for interpreting the world around us. The eyes receive billions, zillions of pieces of information every second, right? All those photons hitting us. And when that happens, they trigger chemical reactions. What we see isn't because something in the universe is that way. What we see is because our brains receive a signal, and we build the image using similar memory recollections, which we then test with our internal vision with the presentation of reality. And if it doesn't match that, we update as necessary. Right? That's how we gain an understanding of the world around us. All that information goes into the neural computer to identify, catalog, and store for future recall. And this is the reason that wild animals may not fear humans. They've never built up an experience of that. Babies don't have an experience of the fear and the fight or flight response of things that can hurt them. They're much more innocent and open because they don't have the comparison experience for the input experience. Their receivers have nothing to compare against. So when we perceive something, we're already in the process of reacting, right? If there's danger, if our life is threatened, our limbic brain immediately takes action and acts as if we might be. Any good surprise requires the activation of the fight or flight response before the neocortex can identify the source and calm us down. That's, if you're ever been the recipient of a surprise party, you're scared. That's really scared. And scared and excited in that instance is the same because you haven't identified what you are yet. It takes longer for the neocortex to realize what's going on and apply the correct emotion to what you're feeling. At a base level, the limbic reaction is the same for surprise, for excitement, and for fear. Identifying the emotion, identifying the stimulus, identifying what you're feeling, how you're feeling it, that's what the neocortex does. It identifies from all the information gathered. If we've experienced something once before, the brain maintains some small record of it. So, what if the entire idea, the pattern of electromagnetic frequency in visible light, is the reason we have a concept of time at all? We are so flush with light particle energy that our brains may have found a way to efficiently refresh our sense of vision, to peer through the ocean of light and pretty much ignore it, right? We don't walk into photons and immediately feel like we're drowning in light. We walk through and we judge the difference in perception from millisecond to millisecond as we move forward. Events are observed in sequence. Our brain catalogs the change between moments in time and presents differences very fast. We are constantly scanning for danger. The rods and cones in the eyes, the receptors in our eyes that see color and grayscale and fast action, they're placed such that movement on the periphery draws attention because it might cause danger. When we're focusing straight forward and things keep distracting us in the periphery of our vision, we can't help but to look at it because from a basic survival sense, that might be danger. When these signals repeat frequently enough, like when they actually figured out animation between 15 and 24 frames per second creates a smooth, lifelike appeal, our brains create a belief about the world outside our bodies when we perceive that motion. In the background, we actually maintain this belief as a small program to help the limbic brain run more efficiently. So we perceive time because of these frame rates that our eyes take in. Whether it's 15 frames a second or 30 frames a second, or movies in the movie theater are often 24 frames a second. Movies on your television are probably around 30 frames a second. Screen refresh for gamers out there is like 60 to 120 frames a second, right? How often does the thing refresh? And your brain, your eyes, perceive some sort of difference. And here's the thing. As we perceive all of that, as we perceive what's going on and the world around us, we're always the center of it. Right here in the present, right here in the now, because it's our perception of the experience. Interesting, what we've discovered in neuroscience is that neurons in the brain react the same whether we're living in the moment, whether we're imagining it, or whether we're remembering something after the fact. The deeper the imagination, the more rounded the picture we create in our brains, the better the neurons fire together, the more the brain has cause to believe the perception. Outside input and inside input are the same to the brain. Which leads me back to time is an illusion. We believe in time, we believe in the concept of time because we perceive it 1 second after the next, because we perceive it one frame after the next. And then our understanding of time is anchored in our personal perception. We see 1 second to the next. We believe in the cycles of day and night because we continue this perception and we have a memory of it. And our brain can't tell the difference between the memory of it and the experience of it. But time is like music. We can't pause it and keep the whole effect. There's no way to pause time. A fraction of the whole and music falls apart. It's unrecognizable, right? If you just stop on one note and play it, time is like that for us. We understand time in our heads because it's an evolutionary leap, like thumbs. Even so, every moment we experience is now. The future is always next and the past is always past. We live in an eternal now, and we are perceiving in an eternal now. Any time from before has gone into our brain and is now in memory. Any time from the future is something we are guessing based on the information we have had. And actually, the more distant past, we have to be taught about. Someone has to teach us the concept of the past and things that have come before us. Only because we believe the records of the past do we believe the past existed. Without the records, what do you think our existence might actually look like? A constant now where we don't maintain the thoughts, where we don't try to predict the future. It's just constant now. We probably wouldn't get very far. So to summarize everything, the limbic brain is the older, faster reacting brain, and the neocortex is the great supercomputer of the senses. The brain is amazing at recognizing patterns and creating efficient connections and neural pathways to maximize those patterns. We are awash in photons and elementary particles of light. And I honestly believe time is an illusion based on the reception of photons to our senses and the way that the brain refreshes to perceive danger on a moment-to-moment basis. So the assignment for this chapter is that I want you to go through the answers that you went through for the first chapter, and I want you to layer in emotions for each of those answers. How will that thing help you feel? How will you feel when you reach your ideal future? How will you feel when you do what you've been working toward? How will you feel about obtaining the items you've wanted? And I want you to look at some of the pictures that you've gotten. And I want you to look at them and say, how will I feel when this is mine? How will I feel when I live in a house like this, when I drive this car? And then I want you to look for more images. Okay? When you start to read some of these reflections, I want you to read them and say, are any of them negative? If they're negative, how can you change that? How can you flip it? How can you rewrite it so it's in a positive? I want you to stay away from judgment, and I want you to put the words to work. I want you to look at them and really imagine how they would work as you start to embrace whatever that future is that you want. Because if the words, the emotions, the things you want to feel aren't big enough to draw you towards it, it's not going to create the right emotional state in the brain. Interesting, huh? So go ahead and write those. Go ahead and write the emotions. And then what I want you to do is go ahead and try writing some emotional statements. So some of these might be like, I will feel joyous as wealth flows to me. I am at the perfect place at the perfect time. How about I feel more whole each day? I feel healthy. I am grateful for the life I live. I am grateful for the people in my life. These ideas help anchor some of the emotions that we are naming and some of the pictures that we're finding so that we understand the future, and we understand actually how we need to teach the brain to think about these external symbols that we're going to teach it to chase. And I look forward to working with you on the next chapter. Thanks.